We have a reading from the Gospel that focuses on the themes of courage and vulnerability. And this little passage I want to read to you comes from a commentator by the name of David Lose, who many of us read and follow. And this is what David says about this particular reading. He says, "There's a kind of courage one displayed not simply in a single moment or act, but a courage that comes in anticipating a significant, daunting, or even frightening challenge and not turning away from it, but rather meeting it head on. This is also a matter of character that has emerged from a lifetime of facing fears and shouldering burdens, and that is also being forged in the very moment of accepting challenges and responsibilities that one could avoid. It's the kind of courage that, in this reading, Jesus displays in the passage before us. The Pharisees come and warn him to go on the lam because Herod is out for his blood. We don't know who these particular Pharisees are or what motivates them, but it doesn't really matter. We just know that they tell Jesus to run and save his life, and that Jesus refuses. Instead, he will keep to the road appointed, traveling the arduous path to Jerusalem to meet his death. What strikes us about this is that the absolute critical role that vulnerability plays in this kind of courage. To anticipate, challenge, and suffering and not look away is, by definition, to make oneself vulnerable for the sake of others. And that is important to mark, because as a culture, we don't often equate vulnerability with courage and strength. We care, love, and concern, perhaps, but not often with courage and strength at the same time. At our worst, we see vulnerability as a sign of weakness, something to be avoided at all costs. Yet in this passage, I think Jesus demonstrates that vulnerability is essential to courage, stands at the core of life, and invites us to discover the peculiar strength of being open to the needs of those around us. And with that, I invite Rebecca to come forward to offer her own courage and vulnerability.
I was really nervous until Elvira sat on her coffee. Now I feel better. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Again, some of you have met me, some of you haven't. I'm going to introduce myself in just a moment, but first I want to begin with a childhood story that best describes what I'm going to talk about today. When I was about 8 years old, I remember thinking that I had a superpower. When you're young and your imagination hasn't yet been made small, it's easy to believe these things. So I would lie in my room at night and focus as hard as I could, trying to discover what my power might be. And as you can imagine, I tried for a very long time with surprisingly few results. But I was young and I was determined, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that there was something powerful inside of me. The confines of my bedroom seemed to be limiting my search, so I began to look for my powers elsewhere. I would climb trees in hopes that I could fly, which I could not. In the bath, I would hold my breath underwater for as long as possible, only to discover that I couldn't breathe under there or turn into a fish. And once I even tried to hold my hand on the burner of the stove, which you can imagine was incredibly painful and incredibly stupid, but promptly taught me that I was not immune to pain. True story. And I still happily admit that I should have listened to my mother when she told me to keep my hands off of the oven. One day while sitting in traffic, my mother cursing beneath her breath as we navigated through rush hour, I thought I should try to test my telepathic abilities by focusing my attention on some of the other drivers. I hadn't yet detected any sign of extraordinary strength, so I began to suspect that my power lay in my mind. I didn't really need super strength because if any of you have seen X-Men, you'll know that people with psychic abilities can usually move whatever they want with their minds, and that made me quite excited because it would be incredibly easy to get my chores done if I didn't have to lift a finger. So as I stared directly and seriously at the driver of a large van next to us, I came to discover with great shame and disappointment that I did not have psychic abilities, but instead only caused the driver to slam on his brakes and promptly flip me off. At the time, I credited his reaction to him undoubtedly being one of the bad guys who I would one day duel in order to save the world. Growing up, I remember reading books about marvelous people, and I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the more well-known names. Ordinary people with fantastic powers like Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, and the Incredible Hulk, just to name a few. These are stories that almost every child grows up reading, or now in 2019, watching on Netflix. You see, from a young age, we are read stories about fantastic people. We're told that greatness exists within all of us, and that even an ordinary person has the power to change the world. And for a long time, I believed that too, until I grew up. My name is Rebecca Taube, and I am the survivor of mental illness, addiction, shame, guilt, and extraordinary circumstances. I am also the founder of a Canadian charity and the program director of 3 mental health peer support programs currently running in the GTA. It's been 20 years since I first suspected that I was extraordinary, and today I'm happy to report that I have finally discovered just how powerful I am. I'm also here today to remind you that you are too, because for a long time I forgot who I was. Growing up is like waking up from the best dream ever only to realize that now everything sucks. No more playing, no more daydreaming, no more superheroes. That stuff's just for kids. We trade in our superpowers for textbooks, grades, credit cards, student loans, mortgages, broken hearts, failed marriages, loneliness, illness, inadequacy, shame, fear, loss, death, and expectations that are impossible to reach. Daydreaming ceases, work comes before play, friends grow apart, and the days end sitting at the dinner table across from a family who couldn't seem farther away. How did we get here? We traded in our imaginations for adulthood, where we are constantly reminded that we are ordinary. We lose ourselves to the same shame and disappointment that I felt at 8 years old when I realized that I didn't have a superpower. Today we're talking about courage and vulnerability, so you might be asking yourself, why is this girl talking about superheroes? So I'll answer that question for you. Superheroes are courageous, but almost every superhero has a vulnerability, or what you might call weakness. We all know that Superman's weakness is kryptonite, so Superman should stay away from it. And we treat our vulnerabilities the same way. Rather than embracing them, we're taught to avoid them. Though every superhero has a vulnerability, if you've read enough comics, you'll know that they always find the courage to face them. They courageously do what they must because they're superheroes, and they will find the strength to do what's right. They face their vulnerabilities because they believe in a greater good, and they'll do whatever they have to do in order to save the world. Part of our problem lies in the fact that we consider vulnerabilities to be weaknesses. Unlike superheroes, we don't so full-heartedly fling ourselves into danger because, of course, we wouldn't want to risk pain, embarrassment, or failure. If Superman gets hurt, he can heal himself. And it also doesn't hurt that he's remarkably handsome. We do not share the same invincibility as superheroes, so we live our lives in fear of damaging ourselves beyond repair. We stop taking risks, even if we feel we should, because we fear losing it all. I always felt like a superhero because I knew that I wanted to change the world. I didn't know why, and I didn't know how, but I knew that one day it would be my job to make a difference. The problem was, I was always looking for something extraordinary, when in fact, it was my most ordinary self that proved to be my greatest power. I shared about my childhood and the dreams I had, but I haven't yet shared about what it took to overcome my darkest self, and how living with depression almost took my life, and how hating myself became my full-time job. And like many others, I retreated within myself, seeing this pain as my greatest weakness and vulnerability. I was the victim of a mind at war with itself, and at the time, I suspected that there would be no survivors. However, as miracles sometimes happen to those that least expect it, I somehow found within me the will to survive. And with that will, another miracle, an opportunity to take my pain that I had endured and use it to help others. What I had survived could be shared, and what I had once considered my weakness could now be used to make the world a better place. My power had not been an extraordinary skill, but rather the most ordinary quality that I possessed, that which made me human. Reading about superheroes may be childish and idyllic, but in my opinion, they remind us of an important fact, that we can be vulnerable, or human, and still be powerful. And that within our vulnerability, or humanness, lies our greatest power. The power to choose to be vulnerable, to be human, to share our stories, to survive, and to follow our hearts even if it hurts to do so. Our most extraordinary power, in fact, lays in our willingness to embrace our weaknesses and fears, to embrace every ounce of what makes us human. It is our darkest moments that pave the path for our brightest days. It is choosing to try even when we may fail, and choosing to live the life that we want even if others may not agree. It is choosing to live even after we have suffered. It is choosing to hope even when we were once hopeless. Our power is choice. We may not be able to fly, manifest super strength, or move objects with our minds, but we are able to live authentically and bravely should we choose to do so. We are able to live beyond the pain that we have suffered, and we are able to reach out and help others do the same. As we grow up and we fail to find that special power of greatness within ourselves that allows us to stand out from the rest, we begin to shrink away. We are told that stories of marvelous people are just stories, and we begin to forget just how fantastic we are. Lost my place. Perhaps we're not meant for greatness, and perhaps that was something we just believed when we were young. We are told that we are not good enough as we are, so we hide behind a plague of sameness, ashamed and disappointed, failing to see that our ordinary humanness is our greatest gift of all. When I overcame my darkest days, I learned that pain is more than pain. It's not just suffering, but an opportunity to rise above and help others. I remind myself often that God does not pick favorites. God does, however, choose to give us what we can handle. And whatever it is that you have been given, that you have survived, you can handle. Even when it feels intolerable, you can rise above. And when you feel like you cannot, you can ask for help, because like myself, there are others who will walk with you. Individuals who have inevitably experienced a pain like yours, who will hold your hand as you rise above together. The way I choose to recover is with others, by courageously facing that which makes us most vulnerable. I learned that changing the world begins in the smallest ways, not by changing the entire world all at once, but by changing the world of those we encounter every day. The smallest acts can have the largest outcomes, and we should not judge our greatness based on the length of our reach, but instead our willingness to be great. Like an 8-year-old girl placing her hand on a stove, you will heal. When you have been burned, you will recover. If you choose to be vulnerable, you will survive. You don't need to jump from trees, hold your breath, or get flipped off by truck drivers to discover what makes you extraordinary. You simply need to survive and embrace without fear that which makes you human. You are, and always have been, extraordinary. Thank you.